The distress signal was only 43 seconds long. Oran had recorded it himself, late at night, sitting alone in the colony's communications room with the door locked. He did not tell Counselor Voss. He did not ask for permission. He had listened to the Vreth raider ships circling the outer docks for 3 weeks, watched 2 cargo haulers get stripped clean, and decided that asking for permission was no longer something he had time for. The Drothi had no military. They never built one. For 400 years they had survived on trade agreements, diplomatic favors, and the understanding that attacking them was more trouble than it was worth. That understanding had held, more or less, until the Vreth decided it no longer did. The signal was simple: colony designation, location coordinates, a brief description of the threat. Then Oran added one more line at the end, something no Drothi diplomat would have ever approved. "We are not soldiers. We cannot fight. If anyone hears this, please come." He aimed it at every known frequency. He aimed it wide, toward the inner sectors, toward the trading lanes, toward the one species whose ships he had seen pass through twice in the last year without stopping. Humans. He had never spoken to one. He had only seen their vessels on long-range scopes, large, angular, always moving fast like they had somewhere to be. The signal left the colony at 3:40 local time. Oran sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. He did not expect an answer. He told himself it was better than doing nothing, and then he went back to his station and started monitoring the Vreth positions again. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, Counselor Voss called a meeting. The situation had gotten worse. 2 of the colony's outer fuel lines had been cut. The Vreth were not attacking, not yet, but they were tightening the circle. Voss believed they were waiting for the colony's power reserves to drop low enough that resistance would be impossible. He laid this out calmly, the way he laid out everything, and then asked if anyone had ideas. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Oran thought about the signal he had sent. He almost said something. Then he decided not to, because it had been 4 days and there was no reply, and bringing it up now would only make people feel worse. The meeting ended without a plan. That same afternoon, at a human deep space relay station roughly 9 light-years away, a technician named Hessa picked up the signal on a routine scan. She flagged it immediately. Her supervisor read it, forwarded it up the chain, and within 6 hours it had reached Fleet Command. Admiral Rowe read it at his desk. He read it twice. Then he pulled up the star charts for that sector, checked the Vreth activity logs that intelligence had been compiling for the last 18 months, and sat quietly for about 2 minutes. His adjutant asked if he wanted to convene a strategic review. Rowe said no. He asked how many ships were currently in formation at the 7th staging point. The adjutant checked: 214 vessels, carriers, destroyers, support ships, a medical frigate, 3 engineering haulers. Rowe said, "Send them all." The adjutant looked up from his screen. He asked if Rowe meant a detachment, a patrol wing, a response unit. Rowe said he meant all of them. There was a short pause. The adjutant nodded and started making calls. By the time the sun set on Fleet Command, 214 ships were already calculating jump coordinates. The crew rotations were reshuffled. Supply manifests were updated. The medical frigate moved up in the formation. Nobody held a press conference. Nobody drafted a formal declaration. A species had asked for help. The paperwork could come later. On the colony, Oran was back in the communications room, running his nightly scan, when a single short transmission came through on the same frequency he had used 4 days ago. It was 11 words. "Signal received. Hold your position. Help is on the way." Oran read it 3 times. He checked the source tag, Human Fleet Command. He sat very still for a moment and then, with his hands shaking slightly, he saved the message and went to find Counselor Voss. Outside, the Vreth ships kept circling. Their lights moved slowly across the dark, the same slow, patient circles they had been making for weeks. They had no idea what was coming. Nobody on the colony did either, not really. Oran only knew that someone had heard them. Someone had answered. And somehow in that moment that felt like enough. He found Voss in the corridor and handed him the printout without saying a word. Voss read it. He looked up. Oran said, "I sent a signal." Voss looked at the message again. Then he looked out the corridor window at the circling Vreth ships. He did not say anything for a long time. Counselor Voss did not sleep that night. He sat in his office with the 11-word message on his desk and thought about what it meant. He had spent 30 years in Drothi diplomacy. He understood how species communicated through channels, through intermediaries, through carefully worded proposals that took months to draft. This message had none of that. No formal header, no listed terms, no indication of what help would look like or what it would cost. Just hold your position. Help is on the way. He did not know what to make of it. He was not sure he trusted it. But he also had no other options, so by morning he had made a decision. He told no one else on the colony about the message. Not yet. If it came to nothing, there was no reason to give people hope and then take it away. The Vreth tightened their formation on the 6th day. 3 of their ships moved from the outer perimeter to the middle ring, positioning themselves directly above the colony's main landing platform. It was not an attack. It was pressure. The Vreth commander, a broad-shouldered figure named Grek, sent a short transmission to Voss. The colony had 4 days to begin transferring its fuel reserves and trade route access codes, or the situation would change. Voss sent back a request for more time to consult with colonial leadership. Grek replied that 4 days was already generous. Voss closed the channel and stared at the wall for a while. Oran was in the communications room running scans every 2 hours. He was not looking for anything in particular. He just needed to feel like he was doing something. On the second scan of the afternoon, he picked up movement on the long-range array. Far out at the edge of sensor range, there was a distortion pattern. Not a ship, not a debris field, something else. He ran it through the analysis system. The system returned an error. He ran it again. The system said the reading was too large to categorize and asked him to check the sensor array for damage. He checked the array. It was fine. He sat with the reading for 20 minutes, adjusting the scan parameters, trying to get a cleaner picture. What he eventually got was not cleaner. It was just bigger. The distortion was not one object. It was many objects moving in formation, still far enough away that the sensors could not get an exact count. His first thought was that the Vreth had called reinforcements. His second thought, a few seconds later, was that the Vreth ships outside were also pointing their sensors at the same direction, and they had gone very quiet. He walked quickly to Voss's office and knocked twice. Voss opened the door. He saw Oran's face and stepped aside without asking questions. They went to the main console together. Oran pulled up the readings. Voss leaned in and studied them for a long moment, his hands clasped behind his back in the careful way he had when he was trying not to show what he was thinking. He asked Oran what the estimated count was. Oran said the sensors couldn't give a confirmed count. The system kept flagging it as an error, but the formation displacement, based on the mass readings, was consistent with somewhere between 180 and 230 vessels. Voss was quiet. Oran said, "I thought it was the Vreth at first." Voss pointed at the directional tag on the reading. The formation was coming from the inner sectors, from human space. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Outside on the Vreth command ship, Grek was having a much less calm reaction. His sensor officer had given him the same reading 3 minutes ago. Grek had demanded a recount, then a recount of the recount. The number did not change. He hailed his 2 nearest captains. Both of them confirmed the reading. Both of them sounded like they were working very hard to keep their voices steady. Grek pulled up everything his intelligence files had on human fleet doctrine. It was not much. Humans were a known species, not a major power, not a threat anyone had prioritized. They had colonies. They had trade ships. They had a military, but no one had ever seen them deploy it at scale because no one had ever given them a reason to. There was nothing in the files about what they did when someone asked them for help. Greg sent a transmission to the colony. He asked Voss directly whether the colony had any relationship with the incoming fleet. Voss looked at Iran. Iran thought about the 11-word message still sitting on the desk. Voss told Greg that the colony had reached out to several contacts in the inner sectors and that the situation was developing. Greg ended the transmission. Iran asked Voss what that meant for the 4-day deadline. Voss said he suspected the timeline had just changed. He was right. By the end of the hour, the Vreth ships had stopped circling and repositioned themselves facing outward, away from the colony, toward the edge of sensor range where the formation was still coming in, still growing on the screen, still not slowing down. They came out of faster-than-light travel in one wave. Not in sequence, not ship by ship, all of them at once, 211 vessels dropping into real space across a front so wide that the Drothi colony's sensor array could not fit the entire formation on a single display. The system split it automatically into 4 panels just to show the full picture. Iran stared at all 4 panels. He had grown up reading about ancient Drothi fleet formations, the kind that existed 6 centuries ago before they gave up military power entirely. The largest one ever recorded had been 63 ships. He had thought that was an enormous number. The human fleet sat in a tight, layered formation. Carriers at the back, destroyers spread forward in a wide V, smaller fast-response ships at the edges, the medical frigate and engineering haulers tucked into the middle of the formation where nothing could reach them easily. It was not a parade arrangement. It was a working shape, the kind you used when you expected to need everything you brought. At the front was a single command ship, larger than the others, moving slowly ahead of the formation with its running lights on full. Iran noticed that the human ships had not powered their weapons. He checked the energy readings twice to be sure. Everything was at cruise level. They had crossed 9 light years, deployed 200 ships, and they had not turned on a single weapon system. He found that stranger than anything else. On the Vreth command ship, Greg's crew was not saying much. His weapons officer had already run the numbers twice. Against this formation, the 31 Vreth ships had no combination of tactics that ended well. Greg knew it. His officers knew it. Everyone was waiting to hear what he would do. He opened a channel to the human command ship. The response came back in under 10 seconds. A human voice, even and unhurried. Admiral Rowe introduced himself and asked how he could help. Greg said that this sector was under Vreth operational authority and that the human fleet had entered it without notice or clearance. Rowe said that was fair and that he was sorry for the short notice. A colony had sent a distress signal. His fleet was the closest available response. Greg said the situation on the colony was a Vreth matter and that outside interference was not welcome. Rowe said he understood and that he was not looking for a conflict. He told Greg directly. The colony had asked for help, the fleet was there to provide it, and the simplest resolution for everyone was for the Vreth ships to move off. He said the Vreth were free to leave the area without any action taken against them. Greg asked if that was a threat. Rowe said it was the opposite of one. He was offering a clean exit. No record, no incident report, no follow-up. Everyone goes home. Greg muted the channel and looked at his officers. His second-in-command, a veteran named Asa, leaned over and said quietly that she had been counting ships and that 31 against 211 was not a conversation about tactics. It was a conversation about how badly they wanted to lose. Greg told her he was aware of the numbers. She said she was just making sure. He reopened the channel and told Rowe He needed time to assess the situation. Rowe said he would give him 10 minutes. On the colony, Voss had been listening to the exchange on an open feed that Iran had patched through. When the channel closed, he sat back and looked at the ceiling. He had been in enough negotiations to know the rhythm of them, the back and forth, the careful language, the room that got left for each side to feel like they had a choice. This had none of that. Rowe had offered one option and set a clock. That was not negotiation. That was something else. He asked Iran what he thought. Iran said he thought the humans had not come here to negotiate. Voss asked what they had come to do. Iran thought about the 43-second signal he had sent, the one Voss had never approved, the one that had said, "We cannot fight, please come." He said, "I think they came to do exactly what I asked." Voss looked out the window at the Vreth ships, which had not moved but were also not doing anything aggressive. They were just sitting there, facing outward, watching the clock run. 7 minutes later, Grek opened the channel again. He told Rowe that the Vreth fleet would withdraw under protest, and that they reserved the right to file a formal complaint through the Sector Trade Authority. Rowe said that was completely within their rights, and that he hoped the rest of their journey was smooth. The Vreth ships began to move, slowly at first, then faster, pulling back from the colony's perimeter and forming a line pointed away from the human formation. On the colony's main deck, a few people had gathered near the windows. Nobody cheered. They just watched the Vreth ships go. It was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when something that has been building for a long time finally breaks. Iran kept his eyes on the sensor display, watching the human fleet hold its position. Still no weapons active. Still running lights on full. He thought 200 ships, and they never even turned on a gun. He did not know what to do with that. The Vreth fleet had been retreating for about 40 minutes when one of their ships turned around. It was not Grek's command ship. It was a mid-size raider near the back of the formation, one of the newer ones with upgraded long-range cannons. Later, when the incident reports were filed, nobody on the Vreth side could give a clean answer for why it happened. The captain of that ship claimed he acted on his own. Some of his crew said he had been arguing with Grek's orders since the retreat started. Others said he just did not believe the humans would actually do anything. The raider broke formation and fired a single shot toward the colony, not at the human fleet, at the colony's outer fuel depot. It was a warning shot, the kind that says, "We are not finished with you." The shot hit the outer wall of the depot. It did not breach the structure, but it blew out 3 docking clamps and started a small fire in the maintenance corridor behind it. On the human command ship, Admiral Rowe watched the sensor reading for approximately 2 seconds. Then he gave an order. It was not a long order. His communications officer sent one tight beam transmission to 4 ships at the edge of the formation. Those 4 ships were already moving before the transmission finished. Fast response destroyers, the kind built specifically for short-distance intercept work. They crossed the distance to the retreating Vreth raider in under 3 minutes. They did not fire on it. They flanked it, one on each side, one above, one below, matching its speed exactly, close enough that the Vreth captain could see their hull markings on his external cameras. Then the human ships cut the raider's engine output remotely, a signal block, the kind used for stalled vessels in civilian ports, and the raider went dead in space. A boarding team was on the hull in 4 minutes. The airlock was open in 6. The Vreth crew was in the raider's cargo bay, disarmed and seated, in under 10 minutes total. Nobody was hurt. The Vreth captain had tried to resist briefly, and a human marine had put him on the floor quickly and professionally, and then helped him back to a seat. The marine asked if he was injured. The captain said no. The marine said good and moved on. Grek watched all of this from his command ship. He had not given the order to turn back, and he had not given the order to fire. His ship had kept moving, but he had seen it happen, and he had done nothing to stop it in the moment, and that was going to be a problem for him later. Right now, he had a larger problem. Rowe opened a channel to the full Vreth formation. He did not raise his voice. He did not list consequences. He said the crew of the captured vessel would be held safely and returned at a designated handoff point once the colony had been secured and the fleet was ready to depart. He said this was the only ship he intended to take. He said the rest of the Vreth fleet was still free to leave and that he recommended they do so now. Grek did not argue this time. He gave the order and the Vreth fleet moved, faster than before. On the colony, the fire in the maintenance corridor had been caught quickly by the automated suppression system. The docking clamps were another matter. Oran walked down to the outer dock with 2 other crew members to look at the damage. The clamps were bent outward, the mounting brackets cracked, one of them hanging loose from the wall by a single bolt. It was not catastrophic, but it was not minor either. Those clamps handled the berthing locks for their largest cargo vessels. Without them, no heavy transport could dock safely. Oran was still looking at the damage when he heard boots on the deck behind him. He turned and saw a human in a gray work suit carrying a tool bag. The human introduced himself as Mick Rains, Fleet Engineering. He said a shuttle had landed at the secondary dock 10 minutes ago and that his team was here to do a damage survey if that was all right. Oran said that was fine. Mick walked up to the broken clamps, crouched down, and looked at them the way someone looks at a problem they have already half solved in their head. He opened his bag. He took out a scanner, ran it along the mounting wall, made a short note, and then took out a wrench and started on the hanging bracket without saying anything else. Oran watched him work for a moment. He asked how long the repairs would take. Mick said maybe 4 hours for the clamps, maybe 6 if the wall mount was cracked deeper than it looked. He said his team had done worse in less time. He said it the same way someone might say they had eaten lunch. Just a fact, nothing special about it. Oran went back to the communications room. He sat down at his console and pulled up the feed from the outer dock cameras. On the screen, Mick was already calling 2 more engineers over, pointing at the wall, talking fast, and the 3 of them got to work like the whole thing was just another morning. Oran had expected the humans to be impressive. He had not expected them to be so ordinary about it. Nobody had prepared for the actual meeting. There was no protocol for it. The Drothai had never established formal contact with humanity. There was no treaty framework, no agreed greeting format, no briefing document on how 2 species should behave when one of them had just shown up with 200 ships to protect the other. Counselor Voss spent an hour trying to draft an opening statement and ended up discarding all of it. Captain Dara Wells arrived at the colony's main airlock with 4 people. A medic, an interpreter unit clipped to her belt, Mick Rains, who was technically there for engineering follow-up, but had joined the group without being asked, and a younger officer named Pell who was carrying a crate of supplies. Voss met them at the lock with Oran beside him. There was a brief moment where both sides just looked at each other. Wells said hello. She said she was glad they had made it in time. She asked if anyone on the colony had been hurt in the depot fire. Voss said 3 crew members had minor burns, nothing serious. Wells asked if their medic could take a look at them. She said it was not a demand, just an offer, and that her medic was very good and had nothing else to do for the next few hours. Voss said yes. The medic immediately went with one of the colony's staff, just like that, no further discussion. Pell set the crate down and opened it. It had food in it, packaged meals, water containers, a few items that Oran did not recognize. Pell explained that they had not known what the colony's supply situation was like after the blockade, and that they had brought extra from the fleet stores. He said there was more on the shuttle if needed. Oran looked at the crate and then at Wells, and said that it had been 3 weeks since a supply ship had gotten through. Wells nodded. She told Pell to go back to the shuttle and bring the rest. Pell left without a word. Voss invited Wells to walk with him. They moved through the colony's main corridor, a long gray hallway with observation ports that looked out at the fleet still sitting in formation in the distance. Wells glanced out at the ships as they passed each window. She did not comment on them. Voss asked her about the captured Vreth vessel. He wanted to know what would happen to the crew. Wells said they were fine, being fed, and would be transferred to a neutral handoff point within the week. She said the human fleet had no interest in holding prisoners longer than necessary. Voss said he was glad to hear that. He paused at one of the windows. He looked out at the formation for a long moment, and then asked the question he had been carrying since the night Oran showed him the 11-word message. He asked why Admiral Rowe had sent the entire fleet. Wells looked at him. Voss said he did not mean it as a criticism. He was trying to understand the reasoning. The Drothai had a colony in trouble and the humans had sent a patrol group or a detachment or a diplomatic vessel, and that would have been generous and sufficient. But 200 ships was something else. He asked what calculation had produced that number. Wells thought about it for a second. Not long, like she was just finding the right words for something she already knew. She said there was no calculation. She said when the signal came in, Rowe had looked at the threat level and matched it. The Vreth had 30 ships in the area with more available. You do not send 10 ships to counter 30. You send enough that the other side does not have to think twice about what happens next. Voss said, but you did not know us. We had no agreement, no alliance, no history. Wells said that was true. Voss said, then why? Wells looked out the window at the fleet. She said, you asked. Voss was quiet for a moment. He had spent his career in rooms where everything had a price, where help came with conditions attached, where the fine print mattered more than the headline, where generosity was usually a different kind of transaction. He did not know what to do with an answer that had no fine print. Oran, who had been walking 2 steps behind them the whole time, quietly took out a small recorder and saved the last 30 seconds of audio. He was not sure why. It just felt like something he should keep. Later, back at the docks, Mick and his team had finished the clamp repairs in 4.5 hours, under the estimate. Mick tested each one twice, noted the readings on his tablet, and then walked the dock slowly with his eyes on the ceiling, looking for anything else that needed attention. He found a cracked support beam 3 sections down that had nothing to do with the Vreth attack, just age and wear. He called over one of his engineers and pointed at it. His engineer asked if they had the materials for it. Mick said they had brought extra. Nobody had asked him to fix it. It was just broken and he was there and it needed doing. Oran watched this from the upper walkway and thought that maybe this was the part nobody had written into the briefings. The humans were not just fast and well-armed. They just kept going, like the job was never quite finished until they were actually back on the shuttle. The Vreth intelligence report took 9 days to reach the high command. It was written by a senior analyst named Drev, who had spent the last 2 years compiling data on minor species in the outer sectors. Humans had been on her list, but low priority. She had updated the file twice in 3 years, both times for routine reasons. She updated it now for a different reason entirely. The report was 12 pages. The first 3 covered the fleet response itself: ship count, formation type, response time, weapons status during the standoff. That section was factual and clean. The last 9 pages were where Drev had clearly struggled because the facts stopped making sense in the usual framework. She wrote, the human fleet traveled 9 light-years in response to a distress signal from a species they had no treaty with, no trade agreement with, and no recorded prior contact with. They deployed their full available formation. They secured the target area, repaired the colony's infrastructure, provided medical and supply support, and departed without claiming any territorial rights, resource agreements, or formal acknowledgement of debt from the colony. The captured Vreth crew was returned unharmed at the agreed handoff point. No demands were made. She had gone back through her records looking for a precedent. She found nothing comparable. She wrote, "Standard military analysis assumes that resource deployment is proportional to expected strategic return. This action does not fit that model. The humans spent significant fuel, crew time, and fleet capacity on a colony that offers them nothing they did not already have. The only triggering factor was the distress signal itself." She sat with that sentence for a while before she continued. She wrote, "It may be that humans respond to distress calls the way other species respond to direct threats, not as calculation but as reflex. If that is accurate, the practical implication is this: any species in distress within human communication range is effectively under human protection, whether or not any formal agreement exists. The cost of testing that boundary, as the Drothi situation demonstrated, is high." Her recommendation at the end of the report was brief. She suggested removing all Drothi trade routes and colonies from active Vreth target lists, not because the Drothi had become powerful, because the humans had noticed them. The High Command read the report. There was a meeting. The meeting was not long. The recommendation was approved. The Drothi corridor was quietly removed from the raid schedule that same week. No announcement. No formal communication to the Drothi or to humanity. It simply stopped being a target. On the colony, the fleet had begun its departure sequence over the course of 2 days. Ships peeled off in groups, jumping back toward their staging point. The medical team left on the second morning after completing a full colony health survey that nobody had requested, but everyone was grateful for. Mick's engineering crew was the last to go, running a final check on the repaired clamps before heading back to their shuttle. Oran walked them out. At the shuttle door, Mick shook Oran's hand, which was a human gesture Oran had read about but never experienced. The grip was firm. Mick said, "You've got solid bones in this place. Just need some upkeep." He said it like he was talking about a house. Then he picked up his tool bag and got on the shuttle. The last ship in the human formation jumped out at 1400 hours local time. One moment the formation was there on the sensors, a dense cluster of 200 vessels sitting quiet in the dark. Then it was gone, not slowly, all at once. Oran sat at his console and looked at the empty sensor display for a while. He pulled up a blank transmission form. He typed for several minutes, deleted most of it, and started again. The second version was shorter. He sent it on the same frequency he had used for the distress call. It said, "This is Oran, Communications Officer at Drothi Colony 7. We are safe. The fleet has gone. We wanted to say thank you. Not to Fleet Command, not to the Admiral, though thank them too, but to whoever received the original signal and decided it was worth sending up. We were 43 seconds and one person away from no one ever knowing we needed help. Thank you for listening." He sent it and closed the console. Admiral Rowe received the message 4 days later, forwarded up from the relay station with a note that it had come in on the same emergency frequency as the original signal. He read it at his desk, the same desk where he had read the first one. He read it twice. His adjutant knocked and asked if the fleet debrief was ready to begin. Rowe set the message down and said yes. He did not tell anyone about it. He did not file it under official correspondence. He saved it in a personal folder with no label. On the colony, Voss finally wrote his official report to the Drothi Council. It covered the blockade, the response, the repairs, and the departure. It was thorough and accurate. At the end, in the section reserved for diplomatic observations, he wrote one sentence that he spent longer on than any other part of the report. He wrote, "The humans do not calculate who deserves help. They hear the call and they come." He read it back once. It was not the kind of language that usually appeared in formal reports. He left it in any way. Oran did not read the report. He was already back at his console, running the morning scan, watching the sector. Quiet now, just stars.